A homeless man asks Sylvester Stallone, "Can you give me $1?" Instead of simply handing him money, Stallone does something unexpected. What happens next changes the man's life forever. The wind cut through Charlie's tattered jacket as he huddled closer to the wall behind him, his fingers numb from the cold. The city of Los Angeles bustled around him. Cars sped by, pedestrians walked past with their heads down, avoiding eye contact as if acknowledging his existence would be an inconvenience. He adjusted the worn-out beanie on his head and pulled, his cardboard sign closer to his chest, the words smudged from weeks of handling, "Anything helps. God bless." His stomach growled, but hunger had become a dull ache, something he had learned to ignore. The loneliness, however, was harder to silence. It had been months since anyone had spoken to him, beyond the occasional muttered "sorry" from a passerby who never really meant it. As he shifted his position, the headlights of a sleek black SUV illuminated his spot on the pavement. The vehicle slowed, then pulled up to the curb. Charlie barely looked up. Expensive cars weren't meant for people like him. They belonged to the ones who never spared him a second glance. But when the door opened, he noticed a man stepping out, the hood of his sweatshirt pulled low over his face. Charlie hesitated. He wasn't one to beg aggressively, but desperation gnawed at him. He swallowed his pride and called out, his voice hoarse from disuse. "Hey, man, can you spare $1?" The man turned toward him. Even in the dim streetlights, Charlie recognized the strong features, the unmistakable presence. His breath caught in his throat. It couldn't be. Sylvester Stallone. Charlie straightened, suddenly self-conscious of his appearance, of the dirt on his hands, the rips in his jeans. He expected the usual, maybe a quick nod, a polite excuse, or even just silence as the man walked away. Instead, Stallone did something that caught him completely off guard. He knelt down in front of Charlie, leveling their gazes, and asked, "What's your story?" Charlie blinked. No one had ever asked. People usually assumed they already knew. Another lazy bum who made bad choices. He hesitated, unsure if this was some kind of joke. But there was something in Stallone's eyes, something patient, something real. Charlie licked his chapped lips and lowered his gaze. "I used to be a construction worker," he mumbled. "Good job, decent pay." He exhaled sharply, shaking, his head as if trying to push away the memories. "Then I got hurt, messed up my back real bad, couldn't work." Stallone nodded, encouraging him to continue. "The medical bills, they just kept coming. I fell behind on rent. My wife..." Charlie's voice cracked and he cleared his throat. "She couldn't take it, left me. I don't blame her. When you got nothing, it's easy to lose people." Stallone didn't interrupt. He just listened. "I tried," Charlie continued, his voice gaining an edge of frustration. "I really did. I went to every job site, but no one hires a guy with no address, no clean clothes. People look at you different when you've been out here too long." He let out a bitter chuckle. "I guess it's easier to pretend we don't exist." A long silence stretched between them. Charlie expected pity, or worse, false sympathy. What he didn't expect was for Stallone to say, "You know, I used to be homeless too." Charlie snorted. "Yeah, right." He shook his head. "Come on, man, you're a millionaire." Stallone leaned back on his heels, his expression unwavering. "Not always," he said simply. "Before Rocky, I was broke. I mean really broke. No one would hire me. I slept in a bus station for days. I was so desperate, I sold my dog for $40 just to eat." Charlie frowned, unsure if he believed it. This was Sylvester Stallone, the action star, the legend. The idea of him sleeping on a dirty floor like Charlie did every night seemed impossible. "But I didn't give up," Stallone continued. "I wrote Rocky. Studios offered me a lot of money for the script, but they didn't want me in it. I was down to nothing, man. I could have taken the easy way out, taken the cash. But I knew," he paused, tapping his chest lightly, "I knew I had something in me." Charlie studied him, unsure of what to say. He wasn't used to someone talking to him like this instead of at him. Stallone exhaled and glanced at the city lights stretching endlessly beyond them. "Fall 7 times, stand up 8. His voice was calm, but there was a weight behind his words. Charlie frowned. "What does that mean?" "It means," Stallone said, "it doesn't matter how many times life knocks you down. What matters is getting back up. One more time, always one more time." Charlie sat with the words for a moment. The cold, the hunger, the exhaustion, it all weighed on him like an anchor. He had fallen so many times he lost count. Could he really stand up again? Stallone looked at him, reading his doubt. "You don't believe me now," he said, standing up and dusting off his jeans. "But you will." Charlie didn't understand yet, but something in the way Stallone said it made him curious. For the first time in a long time, he felt something stir inside him, a flicker of something that almost felt like hope. Stallone sat down on the cold pavement beside Charlie, completely unfazed by the passing stares of people who couldn't decide whether they should stop and watch or pretend not to see. The streetlights above cast a soft glow on the cracked sidewalk, and for a moment it felt like the rest of the world had faded away. Charlie shifted uncomfortably, not sure how to handle the presence of a Hollywood legend sitting next to him, like they were just two old friends having a conversation. "I wasn't always who you see now," Stallone said, leaning back against the brick wall behind them. His voice was calm, steady, but there was something raw underneath, something Charlie wasn't used to hearing from a man like him. "You think I don't know what it's like to be down, to have nothing?" He let out a short chuckle, shaking his head. "I've been there, man. Worse than you think." Charlie glanced at him sideways. "Come on," he muttered. "You homeless? No way." Stallone nodded. "Before Rocky, I was just another guy chasing a dream that nobody believed in. I wanted to be an actor, but nobody wanted me. I got rejected over 1,500 times." He let the number hang in the air. 1,500 times. "You know what it feels like to hear no that many times?" Charlie swallowed hard. He had been rejected too, by employers, by people walking past him every day, even by life itself. But 1,500 times, that was something else. "I was so broke," Stallone continued, rubbing his hands together as if remembering those nights that I had to sleep in a bus station for 3 days straight, didn't even have money for food. He let out a breath. "And the worst part, I had this dog, Butkus, my best friend, my only real family back then. But I was so desperate, so damn hungry that I had to sell him for $40. His jaw tightened. "It was the hardest thing I ever did." Charlie's chest ached at the thought. He had seen guys out here forced to give up their only companions, watching helplessly as someone walked away with the one thing that still loved them unconditionally. "Then one day, I wrote Rocky," Stallone said, his voice warming slightly. "Put my heart into that script. I thought, this is it. This is my shot." He turned to Charlie, his eyes sharp with intensity. "And guess what happened? Studios wanted it. They wanted it bad." Charlie raised an eyebrow. "So that's when everything got better?" Stallone smirked. "Not exactly." He leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. "They offered me $100,000 for the script," Charlie whistled low. "Damn, that's a lot of money." "Yeah," Stallone said, nodding, "and I needed it, more than anything. But there was a catch. They didn't want me to play Rocky. They wanted a real star, someone bankable, not some no-name guy with a slurred speech and a funny-looking face." Charlie frowned. "What did you do?" Stallone exhaled slowly. "I said no." Charlie's eyes widened. "You turned down $100,000? Stallone nodded. "Because I believed in myself. I knew that if I let someone else play that role, it wouldn't be my story anymore. It wouldn't mean what I wanted it to mean. So I turned them down over and over until finally someone gave me a shot." Charlie shook his head, trying to wrap his mind around it. "Man, I don't know if I could have done that." Stallone smiled. "I won't lie to you. It was the hardest thing I ever did. But it paid off. They finally agreed to let me star in it. And when Rocky came out, it changed everything. He paused, his expression softening. And the first thing I did with my money, I tracked down the guy I sold butkas to and bought him back, paid 15 grand just to get my dog back. Charlie let out a low whistle. Damn! Stallone turned to face him fully. So tell me, how many times have you fallen? Charlie scoffed. Too many to count. Stallone smiled. Then you're almost there, Charlie frowned. Almost where? One more fall, one more stand-up. That's all it takes, Stallone said simply. You're not done, Charlie. Not even close. Charlie stared at the pavement, his mind swirling. He wanted to believe it, wanted to think that maybe, just maybe, there was still something left for him out there. But years of failure had worn him down. Then Stallone did something unexpected. He reached into his pocket, pulled out a crisp $100 bill, and held it out to Charlie. Charlie stiffened. His first instinct was to shake his head. I can't take this. Stallone's grip on the bill didn't waver. This isn't a handout, he said firmly. This is a challenge. Charlie hesitated, his fingers twitching. A challenge? Stallone nodded. You have 24 hours to use this to change something in your life. No booze, no wasting it. If I see you again tomorrow, you tell me how you stood up. Charlie looked at the bill like it was something foreign, something he wasn't sure how to handle. $100 could mean food, maybe a place to sleep for a night, but Stallone was asking for more than that. He swallowed hard and after a long pause reached out and took the bill. His fingers curled around it tightly. Stallone stood up and dusted off his jeans. I'll be around, he said. Don't let me down. Charlie watched as the man who had once been in his shoes turned and walked away, disappearing into the city lights. He sat there for a long time, staring at the bill in his hand, feeling the weight of it, not the money, but the meaning behind it. For the first time in years, Charlie didn't feel invisible. He felt challenged, he felt seen, and for the first time in years he wondered if maybe, just maybe, he had one more stand-up left in him. Charlie gripped the crisp $100 bill in his trembling hands, staring at it as if it was something unreal, something fragile that might disappear if he blinked too hard. He hadn't held this much money in a long time, and the weight of it in his palm felt heavier than it should have. His mind raced. What do I do with this? He could buy food, a real meal, not scraps or whatever he could scavenge. He could pay for a warm bed for the night, sleep with a roof over his head instead of curled up in an alleyway. But then what? Tomorrow would come, and he'd be right back where he started. Hungry, homeless, hopeless. $100 wasn't enough to change his life, was it? He glanced down the street, and his eyes landed on the neon glow of a liquor store sign. His pulse quickened. Just a couple of drinks would take the edge off, make the night easier to get through. No more cold, no more pain, no more thinking. Took a step toward the store, but Stallone's words echoed in his head. One more stand-up, that's all it takes. Charlie froze. His grip on the bill tightened. He'd fallen more times than he could count. But what if Stallone was right? What if he was just one stand-up away from something different? With a sharp breath, he turned away from the liquor store and kept walking. A block later, the scent of fried food and coffee drifted toward him from a small diner on the corner. His stomach twisted painfully, and before he could second-guess himself, he pushed open the door. The warmth hit him first. It wrapped around him, thawing the parts of him that had been frozen for so long, his hands, his feet, his spirit. The place was nearly empty, just a few late-night customers sipping coffee, lost in their own worlds. Charlie slid into a booth near the window. A waitress, a middle-aged woman with dark hair pulled into a loose ponytail, walked over with a tired but genuine smile. "What can I get you, sweetheart?" Charlie hesitated, still clutching the bill like it might disappear. What's the cheapest thing you got?" She frowned slightly, then looked him over. His tattered clothes, the exhaustion in his eyes. She had seen it before. She softened. "How about a real meal?" she said gently. "On the house." Charlie shook his head. "No, I can pay. Just something warm." She nodded and walked away. A few minutes later, she returned with a steaming plate of eggs, bacon, toast, and hash browns. Charlie stared at it, overwhelmed. The smell alone made his mouth water. He picked up his fork and took the first bite. It was the first hot meal he had eaten in weeks. As he ate, the waitress, her name tag read Maria, lingered near his booth. "Haven't seen you around before," she said. Charlie swallowed and wiped his mouth with a napkin. "I don't really have a place," he admitted. "Just trying to figure things out." She nodded like she understood. "You got a plan?" Charlie hesitated. He didn't. Not really, but Stallone's voice echoed in his head again. "One more stand-up. Do you know anyone hiring?" he asked suddenly, surprising even himself. Maria blinked. Then, after a moment of thought, she said, "Actually, our manager's been looking for someone to help clean up in the mornings." Charlie's heart pounded. Work. A chance. But then doubt crept in. He hadn't worked in years. What if he couldn't do it? What if he messed up? What if they took one look at him and told him to get lost? Maria must have sensed his hesitation because she smiled and said, "You don't have to decide right now. But if you show up tomorrow morning, I'll put in a word for you." Charlie stared at her, then at his half-eaten plate of food. He thought about Stallone, about the way he had fought for his dream even when everyone told him no, about how he had refused to give up no matter how many times life knocked him down. Maybe this was his one more stand-up. "Okay," Charlie said, "I'll be here." Maria smiled, then walked away to tend to another table. Charlie finished his meal, leaving a few bills from the $100 note on the table. He still had some money left, but he knew he couldn't show up in the same ragged clothes he had been wearing for months. He needed to look like someone who wanted a job. He spent the next hour walking the streets until he found a thrift store that was still open. The cashier gave him a wary look as he stepped inside, but he ignored it and browsed the racks. He found a simple button-up shirt, a pair of second-hand shoes that weren't falling apart, and a clean pair of jeans. He paid for them and carried the bag with him as he searched for a place to sleep for the night. He ended up in a quiet alleyway, using his old jacket as a blanket. The cold still bit at him, but something was different. For the first time in a long time, he had something to wake up for. The next morning, Charlie stood outside the diner, just as the sun was rising, clutching his bag of clothes. His stomach churned, not from hunger, but from nerves. What if this was a mistake? What if they laughed at him? But then he saw Maria through the window, talking to a man in a white apron. She caught sight of him, smiled, and gestured for him to come in. Charlie took a deep breath, and then, for the first time in years, he stepped forward. Days turned into weeks, and for the first time in years, Charlie had a routine. Every morning, he arrived at the diner before sunrise, sweeping the floors, wiping down tables, and scrubbing dishes until his hands were raw. The work was exhausting, but it felt different this time. It wasn't just about survival. It was about proving to himself that he could stand up again. Maria kept an eye on him, always offering an encouraging word or an extra plate of food when she could. The manager, a gruff but fair man named Tony, barely acknowledged him at first. But after a few weeks of showing up on time and working hard, Tony started giving him more responsibility, stocking supplies, taking out the trash, even prepping ingredients in the kitchen. Charlie didn't waste a cent of what he earned. Every dollar he made went towards saving up for something more stable. He found a small shelter that offered transitional housing and managed to rent a tiny room with a bed. It wasn't much, just a space with 4 walls and a door that locked, but it was his. Every night, as he lay in that bed, he stared at the ceiling and thought about the night he had met Sylvester Stallone. He thought about the $100 bill still tucked safely in his pocket, unspent. It wasn't money to him anymore. It was a symbol, a reminder of the choice he had made. One evening, as Charlie was wiping down the counter, the bell above the diner's door chimed. He glanced up and froze. Stallone stood in the doorway, scanning the room. When his eyes landed on Charlie, he grinned. "Hey, kid," he said, stepping inside. Charlie wiped his hands on a towel, feeling a lump rise in his throat. "You came back," Stallone smirked. "Told you I would." He looked him up and down, taking in the clean shirt, the steady hands, the light in his eyes that hadn't been there before. "You look different." Charlie nodded. "I feel different." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small frame. Inside it, pressed behind the glass, was the same crisp $100 bill that Stallone had given him that night. Charlie held it up with a proud smile. "I didn't spend it," he said. "I invested it." Stallone chuckled, clearly impressed. "Smart man." Charlie nodded. "That bill reminded me of something. It wasn't about the money. It was about what I did with it. I used what I had to get to the next step, and then the next. And now—" he gestured around him. "Now I'm standing." Stallone clapped a hand on Charlie's shoulder, his expression full of pride. "So you stood up?" Charlie grinned. "And I'll do it again if I have to." Stallone's face softened and he nodded. "Then you understand. Fall 7 times, stand up 8. Charlie repeated the words under his breath as if sealing them into his soul. He had heard them before, but now they meant everything. They sat down in a booth, and Charlie told Stallone everything, how he had resisted the liquor store, how he had found the job, how Maria had given him a chance, how he had saved up for a room of his own. He talked about the fear, the doubt, the moments when he had almost given up. But each time he had remembered the lesson, one more stand-up. Stallone listened, nodding, his eyes filled with something between admiration and understanding. When they finished talking, Stallone reached into his pocket and pulled out something small. It was a key. He set it on the table and slid it toward Charlie. Charlie frowned. "What's this?" "A chance," Stallone said simply. "It's for a small gym. A buddy of mine owns it and they need someone to help out. Cleaning, organizing, running errands. It's not glamorous, but it's something. And maybe, if you stick with it, it'll lead to something more." Charlie stared at the key, emotions welling up in his chest. "Why are you doing this for me?" Stallone leaned back and smiled. "Because someone once gave me a chance when I had nothing, and because I know you won't waste it." Charlie swallowed hard and took the key. "I won't." As Stallone stood up to leave, Charlie called out, "Wait!" Stallone turned back, eyebrows raised. Charlie glanced out the window where a man sat on the sidewalk with a cardboard sign, the same way he had once sat. Without hesitation, Charlie walked over, knelt down, and held out a few dollars from his pocket. The homeless man looked up in surprise. "Why?" Charlie smiled. "Because I was you, and someone once helped me." Stallone watched from the doorway, nodding to himself. Charlie wasn't just standing up, he was helping others to do the same, and that was how real change began.